Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Justin Duvall, and week to week you know me as Justo. Our variety show is a positive hits show, and we maintain that for future episodes. However, due to the current news, we find that we can only talk about one subject, and that is the racial problem in the United States of America. If this makes you uncomfortable, please turn off the episode, catch our online content this week, and next week we'll be back with our normal format. Without further ado, here's Justo's Best Podcast.
We thank you for tuning into this special episode of Justo's Best. This topic is near and dear to our hearts. We are in pain. Tears were shed recording this episode. And while we paused to prevent that emotion from spilling into the show, it was edited only for clarity. Make no mistake about it. Our opinions are expressed in unadulterated passion. We did not write a script or prepare. We let our hearts guide us to this episode. For some of you, this is going to be unsettling and difficult to listen to. Good. We cannot sit back any longer. You cannot sit back any longer and allow this systemic racism to continue. We implore you to support the protests, support the movement, but most importantly, support each other. No one can liberate anyone else. No one can be liberated alone. Freedom requires communion. Freedom requires unity. Freedom requires action, not silence.
I think that is an answer to that myth, and it is that time is neutral. It can be used either constructively or destructively. And I'm absolutely convinced that the forces of ill will in our nation, the extreme rightists in our nation, have often used time much more effectively than the forces of goodwill. And it may well be that we will have to repent in this generation, not merely for the vitriolic words of the bad people and the violent actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence and indifference of the good people who sit around and say, wait on time. Somewhere we must come to see that social progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals, and without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. And so we must help time, and we must realize that the time is always right to do right.
All right, welcome to the Justo's Best Podcast. As I explained in the bit before, this is a bit of a different episode. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with a headline. This headline is the preface for this episode. A week ago today, on May 25th, George Floyd of Minneapolis, Minnesota, was murdered by a police officer. If somehow you've been under a rock and don't know what this has led to, what has led to this, and how important this topic is, I hope you listen to this episode, and I hope you take all of our points into consideration. And with that being said, gentlemen, I'm joined with Richie Phillips, DJ Tony Ray, and Marvin Scott, as always. Fellas, how you doing?
Doing good, Justo. Doing good. Doing the best that I can do in the times that we're in, but making it happen.
Hanging in there, fellas. So it's great to see you guys. Just like Tony said, I'm doing the best I can, and here we are, and it's good to be with you guys today.
I'm pretty angry, to be honest, and I'm going to try to articulate myself based on the topics that we're going to discuss. But yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing my opinions and hearing your guys' stuff as well.
I want to first and foremost thank each of you. We could have just as easily taken the week off. We could have pretended like this wasn't going on and stuck with our normal programming. But instead, you each expressed the courage to speak on this. And for that, I love you guys. I'm grateful. And this topic absolutely has to be discussed, in my opinion. Now, a week ago Monday, on May 25th, George Floyd of Minneapolis, Minnesota, was arrested, detained, and murdered by Officer Derek Chauvin and 3 other officers in front of a crowd and a live video. Marvin, this is not new. What's your outlook on it?
Well, I've tried to find the right words, before coming on today's show. Folks, you guys, this isn't news to me anymore. It's more like a reoccurring nightmare. I can't begin to express the kind of pain that you feel hearing a story like this over and over and over again. And it just, in so many ways, it hits home, fellas. This past summer, there was a mass shooting in my hometown of Dayton, Ohio. I moved to New York City 6 years ago. And I thought I was naive when I moved away to think that moving to New York City, I would get away from that. But I was even more naive to think that I could get away from this repetitive nightmare that we keep having to live every single year, month after month. It's a story that keeps coming up, and there seems to be no solution. And on today's show, I hope that by the end of it, I could answer that question a little better, Justo, of what my outlook on the future is going to be, because I'm not so sure right now. And with a touch on Richie and all of us talked about before the show when he moved out to Oakland, I felt the same way. I thought I was getting away from it, fellas, but I just my thoughts and prayers go out to the Floyd family first and foremost, and I don't think anyone should complain about not being able to breathe through a mask anymore.
DJ Tony Ray, how you doing, man?
Sad, mad. I've got so much emotional anxiety going on inside. It's just, and it's not like this is all new. This is, like Marvin said, a recurrence that just keeps happening. And, I always feel sick inside, when it happens. I always, question, why does it keep happening? And I tell myself that, it's 2020. Or I tell myself it's 2017. Or I tell myself, it's 2010. And I keep telling myself these years, but it never changes. And, 26% of killings done by cops are done by blacks. And it sickens me. And the leading cause for black males young is police shootings. So I have to sit here and ask myself, what needs to change? What needs to happen? How can we get past this? And it's something that's not come to me yet. And like Marvin said, I hope that it does come to me and not just me, but to the United States of America. And I hope that people listen and have an open mind and not a narrow mind. And we can make a difference. That's what we need to do, is make a difference.
Richie?
Well, fellas, it's been very difficult for me this week. I've been trying to stay off social media and not have any kind of thought until I really sat down and understood a lot of my frustrations. And to start off with, it isn't just senseless murders. We can get into that, and we already have. But let's just look at incarcerations. 5-1 white males to black males in the United States. And black males are 5 times more likely to be incarcerated and are incarcerated. And it scares me to death just hearing these ridiculous stories of just people just living, walking around. And it's like they're being punished for being black. They're targeted 1,000%. And, you know, I hear these stories all the time, like people like George Floyd. And it could be Tony, it could be Marvin next time, man. Just walking down the street and for no reason at all, just murdered because of the color of their skin, not for who they are as human beings, not for what they've done. I don't understand the senselessness. It happens all the time. Breonna Taylor didn't do anything. She was sleeping in her bed, and the police had the wrong address. They came in, kicked it down, and shot her to death while she was sleeping in her house. There's a lot more I'd like to say, but I'm trying to just compose myself in the moment. But if you don't understand why this is a problem, then I really hope you continue to listen today, because this is systemic. It's not isolated. This is not just the police. This is how we are as a society in America.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that a man laid on his chest, a big man, something I can relate to. Very, very small list of things I can relate to, and for 8 minutes and 45 seconds, beg for your life at the hands of somebody who we are raised to protect us. You know, we're raised to believe that these officers are here to protect us from vicious murders, from racism that leads to hate crimes, that leads to death. We're supposed to stand behind the badge and let them take care of the bad guy. So what do we do when the bad guy is wearing the badge? Now, let me be the first to say, it is a different subject, but no, not all guys with a badge are a bad guy. But the fact that racism exists as strongly as it does, and the fact that bad guys do have badges, it's enough. It's enough to make this place, this country, scary to live in. I don't know how else to say it. I mean, nobody should have to be afraid all the time. But what do black men and women do to not feel that way when it's on a video with the guy looking right at the video? He knows he's being recorded. And I don't know. I'm going to try to compose myself because this is going to continue on, but I hope you're listening very closely, and I hope you understand that we do respect everybody's opinion. I encourage you to check out what Justo's Best is about if this is your first episode, because this is a positive show, but there is nothing positive going on right now. We'll be right back. This is the Justo's Best podcast.
We killing each other because we killing ourselves. We not when another man. I know I've been in a position. It's out of our control. It's not like he wants to kill. He just doesn't want to die. You know what I'm saying? It's that situation when you got we are living in a war zone. It's not as easy as these people are making us think, that they just got some criminal ass black kids with guns. It is not like that. We live in hell. We live in the gutter. We got us stacked up 80 deep in one building. You know, by the time you get out your house, you strapped to protect yourself, because you living in the same community that the police is carrying rifles and riot gear. Same, they need them riot, excuse my language, I'm so sorry. The same reasons they need the riot hat, the riot jacket, the flak jacket, the double vest, the 9mm Glocks with extra bullets, the tear gas, the mace, all that. Who do you think the police is using that against? Dogs? So we fighting the same villains that they fight in the street. But instead of them seeing us fighting villains in the street, we all villains.
All right, so let's get into the details of what happened. George Floyd, the police were called on him by a store owner who claimed that he thought Floyd was trying to pass a $20 bill. Now, in an interview with CNN, and this is not any kind of direct quoting, but you can access the interview through CNN, the store owner spoke on just that he called the police. Floyd then left, but stayed outside. And the security footage from the store was later released in compliance with the investigation that is now going on. But when the police arrived, they detained a compliant George Floyd, and then for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, Officer Derek Chauvin left his knee and shin on the back and neck of George Floyd in an attempt to subdue. He wasn't resisting. There's no explanation. 2 minutes and 53 seconds of that 8 minutes and 46 seconds that the knee was on the neck of George Floyd. For 2 minutes and 53 seconds of that, he wasn't even responsive. Okay? And the immediate reaction the next day by the police department of Minneapolis, Minnesota, was to fire the 4 officers that were on site. There's video footage. You've seen it. If you haven't seen it, you have an opportunity to see it. It's all over the internet. If you watch the video, you'll see all the officers involved either assisting in putting additional pressure on the back of the unarmed, detained, on his face suspect, or just standing around controlling the crowd. There's a lack of protocol, but he can't even go there with that. I mean, it's so much more than a lack of protocol. First and foremost, the first thing you do after you detain a suspect, and this is coming from several officer articles. This is coming from an officer that I do want to shout out that was willing to come on the show and may just come on the show later when it's not such a heated subject. You don't leave them on their stomach. As soon as they're detained, you get them up so that they can breathe freely. So there's a lack of protocol, but you can't generalize it to that. It's much more than that. It was murder, in my opinion, in the first degree, but the state of Minnesota and the Minneapolis court, they gave Mr. Former Officer Chauvin, after, they were initially all 4 just pressed. I'm sorry. It took almost a week to get any charges pressed on Officer Chauvin, and the charges were third degree murder and second degree manslaughter. So there's the facts. That's what's out. That's what happened. Now let's open it up, because there is so much more than that, guys.
It took a week to make that arrest. 1 week. And just the fact that that's not even in the protocol when you're detaining somebody, to put your foot on someone's neck or their back. I just don't understand how anyone is a threat when their arms are behind their back and their head and They're face down on the ground. How is any man a threat at that point? I just want to know, fellas, like, if anyone can answer that for me, that's been the one question that's been burning me up, is how, in the process of police training, how that is ever okay.
You can't. It's not. The answer is he's not a threat. Once he's subdued, once he's unresponsive, once the brain is no longer sending the signals, once you're starting the process of dying, he's not a threat. You don't have to keep your knee on his neck anymore. You never needed it there in the first place, Officer Chauvin. Free forum to respond. I'm sorry, Tony.
No, I mean, I agree 100% with what you both said. I can't fathom the fact that you would have your knee on someone's neck, A, at all, B, for the length of time that you had it there. You had people by you screaming, he can't breathe, get up. You had the man himself on the ground saying, I can't breathe. Please, I don't want to die. I can't breathe. When did the trigger not go off in your brain to come off a little bit? You already had help there. If you felt like you were, overwhelmed with this big guy who's laying belly flat on the ground. I just don't understand what made you think that you had to keep your knee pressed against this man's neck with so many other obstacles, variables in front of you that was saying, please don't continue. Please, I can't breathe. But that light bulb never went off. So the question is, why didn't that light bulb ever go off? Is it a lack of training? Is it you didn't know what to do? Is it your life was in danger? Is it because you felt empowered? What was it? That's the question that needs to be asked.
Yeah, guys, I quite frankly don't even want to discuss it in that capacity because the reality of how I view this is very much directly related to how people think. It's systemic racism, in my opinion. And just because there are bad cops and there are good cops doesn't change the fact that at the end of the day, everyone in America is the same way. It's not just these police officers. These happen to be empowered. They happen to have the power to do this freely. But if we didn't have these police officers and this was the Wild West, it would be even worse because that's the reality of what we live in right now. And it's not changing. I also want to take a side note on this because what I've been seeing, and as I mentioned earlier, I've been off social media, and what I've been seeing is too many people trying to make this too much of a social rights movement. The reality is this is not the time for that. This is not the time to address women's rights. This is not the time to address LGBTQ rights. This is 100% the time to discuss what's happening to Black people in America, and that's it. Hold your agendas for something else. There's plenty of time to discuss that later. But that's not why we're here. That's not what we're talking about. That's not what needs to happen. Last week, we discussed Colin Kaepernick briefly on our show. And you don't really need to listen to that, people. But the bottom line is one thing I'd mentioned previously, and I try to avoid saying it specifically, but it was systemic racism then, and it's just like it is now. You had a gentleman kneeling before a game, doing nothing. It was as peaceful as it could be. You could hardly even call it a protest, quite frankly. 15-second act, minute and a half, doing the song. That was it. That's all he was doing. 5 years before that, you had a gentleman who was white, kneeling multiple times in the game in the name of religion. But at the end of the day, it was the skin tone. It had nothing to do with the movements. We're going to discuss the movement much further, quite frankly, and we're going to discuss the situation with protests. So I don't want to get too far into this because that's another topic we're going to discuss. But it's the exact same thing. People talk about, protesting peacefully, and Colin Kaepernick tried that. And these are the same people. You ended his career. You won't say Black Lives Matter. You won't say anything like that. But 6 months from now, Merry Christmas is going to be a problem to you. Happy Holidays on a cup is an issue. You do understand what it's like to be culturally threatened, but you don't want to rally on anything that doesn't affect you. You do get it. You say you want peaceful protests, you want lives to be important, but you turn blind eyes to racism. It's systemic, it's violent. It happens every single day. This isn't the only time it's happened. These things happen. People have to burn things to the ground, so to speak. Sometimes it's literal, sometimes it's figurative, and then you take issues with it. You find reasons to hate a movement that's just trying to say, we matter. They say Black Lives Matter. You say all lives matter, when it has nothing to do with you. One person's just saying, I matter, and you have a problem with that. And that's the problem in American society right now, is that people focus too much on how it does or doesn't impact them, and they don't think about how it could impact other people.
Well, you're absolutely right on that. And, the big thing for me is, just because a situation or a topic or something has multiple components, it doesn't mean that you can take the focus away and just, okay, well, I'm not comfortable about talking about this issue, so I'll focus on the fact that this is involved, or I'll focus on the fact that this is involved. How dare you? If you're not going to speak up, it's not going to get fixed. If we don't all work together to get it fixed, it's not going to get fixed. So how dare you? Not to say that any of these other components aren't problems. They are. But look what's happening in our country right now. Like Richie said, we're going to go over it, but look what's happening. It's an issue. It's time we figure out what to do about it. I want to talk about training before we leave this subject. I want to talk about how maybe in this case it's not. Maybe in this case it is. But in general, I don't think police officers should just have to go through a police academy, because we have too many wild cards nowadays. Now, I have no disdain for the police in general. That I want to point out that there are officers within my network, within my family. I care about you, and I know and respect the way you do business. Please continue to do so, because I feel safe because of people, men and women like you. For the rest of you, listen up. We need to send officers to boot camp, where they learn combative training to the extent that the soldiers that go overseas learn it. Why? Because when the soldiers go overseas, they use a thing called the Geneva Convention. So when they're dealing with a suspect, an armed suspect, aiming a firearm at them, ready to shoot, they have several steps that they take before they initiate any kind of violence that leads to death. Meanwhile, over here, officers are killing people at will. Send them to boot camp. Send them to advanced infantry training, a modified version for the police, and then send them to the academy so they can learn the things that they need to know to be an officer of the law. I don't trust you with a gun. Give them multiple psych evaluations and check up on them. Require testing every 5 years. Because how long is this, Tony? You got facts for me? How long was this guy on the force?
Yeah, Justo. So Derek, the 44-year-old white male, he's been an officer in the Minneapolis Police Department since 2001. He's had 18 complaints on his official record, 2 of which ended in discipline from the department, including an official letter of reprimand. So, he's been around for a while. But going back off of what you said, Justo, does the training have to be different? I'm all for enhanced training. I'm all for making people, a little bit better and diligent when they're doing something when it comes to people's lives. But the reality is the society that we live in. And the society that we live in, it's gonna take more than just training, because some of these people that go through training already have preconceived notions about a certain race. And it could be white, it could be black, it could be Asian, etc. I can keep going, but why waste the time? We know why we're here. The reason we're here is because there's people that are being empowered that have a mindset of to be honest with you, of hate. They have a hatred for certain people and they take it out. Like you said, it's not all cops. I have no problem with all the cops. I love the men and women of blue. I respect the men and women of blue, just like I respect all the men and women that serve our country. But we can't forget that there are a couple rotten apples or some really bad eggs out there that show up in times like this, and it makes you question, how far have we come? How far have we come? Have we come further than when they used to throw rocks at a carnival game that was called Hit the Coon Baby that ended in 1943? Yes, that's right. There was a carnival game in this nation where they threw a rock at baby black children. It was a carnival game. They used to hunt black people during a picnic. I'll break the word down for you. Picnic. They used to hunt him. They'd lynch him. And then they would cook him over a fire. These are facts. Look them up. Jim Crow Museum. You can look it up and see it for yourself. This is the world that we live in. Not the world we live in now, but this is the country that once used to do those things. So if we live in a country that once used to do those things, and you have people who think that that's the way that things should be, and they're still under the rock living, and they come out and play, and they decide to put a badge on, imagine what kind of damage they can do. Imagine what kind of damage they did do. Is he a racist? I don't know. I can't say for him. Is he a hater? I don't know. I can't say for him. But the question to me is, why do these killings continue to happen? And why do we brush them under the rug? And why is it acceptable to brush it under a rug? And then when we don't want to brush it under a rug and we do free protesting, positive protesting, marches, anything, then we're in the wrong. I can't even knee on the ground for 30 seconds during the beginning of the national anthem to make my point. What do you want me to do? What do you want us to do? What do you want them to do? That's the question. What do you want them to do? It's been years and years of oppression, and it's boiling over, and racism has never left. Was the killing of George Floyd a racist act? I can't say, but it sure feels like it to me.
Yeah, just kind of listening to you, Tony. One of the things that really stuck out and struck to me was kind of what we were talking about before the show, which is complacency. There's so many people, and once again, I have to go off social media because this is the world we live in nowadays, and I sit here and I watch people, and I watch them not articulate things or even articulate things, and I watch them say, as we mentioned earlier, you know, not all. I hate that phrase, not all, right? Not all men are rapists. Not all men are bad people. Not all cops are bad, right? Blue lives matter. All lives matter. I hear that all the time, but that's the sentiment and that's the thinking that leads to this. Because at the end of the day, there's always going to be rotten apples, and you can't continue to try to fix the rotten apples. But what you can do is try to change your mentality and understand that these people exist and they are the problem. And by not speaking out and by sitting here and not wanting to discuss it and not be open to the discussion, you are part of the problem. It's not going anywhere. And the longer you hold back on this, the longer you hide from it, the longer you avoid it, you're not helping. And honestly, those are the type of people who I don't want in my life anymore. I've looked at these social media things and I've seen people discuss these. And again, we're going to be talking about protests and rioting in our next subject. But I've seen people who just said very recently, 2 days ago, as a matter of fact, not referring to the person in name, but I saw them say, for those of you who support the Black Lives Matter movement after seeing last night's undertaking and pardon my language, it's going to be censored. F you. I immediately unfriended him because that is exactly the problem. You focus on an action and you associate it to a movement. And it's what I was saying earlier. It's because you're being defensive. It's because you're trying to find something that substantiates not necessarily your hatred, but your ignorance and your willingness to avoid things and avoid conflict and not accept what reality is. And those are the types of things I'm going to discuss in the next subject further. But you have to start thinking about it. You're not an ally. You can sit here, Karen, and just say you're an ally. You can sit here and say, I support you. But when you don't reach out, when you don't communicate, and when you're not doing something actively, but you just say, oh, that's wrong, you're not helpful. You're not supportive. And my good friends like Marvin and Tony, they are Black. I am not impacted in any capacity by this other than my empathy and understanding. And I can't sit here and watch this continue to happen. It's disgusting. And a lot of my friends at home are white. And I encourage all of you, if you're listening, and all of you who I don't know, all of my listeners here, I want you to really think about what your beliefs are and really think about every one of these incidents and understand how you speaking or not vocalizing your opinion and not either supporting or being disdainful affects us, affects who we are, and affects how we feel about each other.
And as we move further into the show, as Richie was saying, I want to have an opportunity for you all to examine your inner circles and who you surround yourself with. And that should let you know everything you need to know of who's advocating this kind of violence against Black people. And you'll know who's standing up and actually aligning themselves in this fight. You don't have to go out there and picket. You don't have to go out there and scream and yell. You can use all your platforms to speak out, to reach out. And like Richie was saying, we're all going to have a chance. You all are going to have the opportunity to define your circle and how you want to see yourself going forward, what you deem is acceptable in society today. You're going to have that chance to answer that as we move forward in the show.
Like you guys said, examine yourself. I would make sure that the African American people in your life really don't mean that much to you before you say some of the things you say online, because you're hurting way deeper than you could ever know. You're stabbing, and all you're doing is deflecting. You're stabbing without reason. That's the problem we're dealing with in the first place. Oh, I gotta bleep myself. With that being said, we need to wake up. We need to wake up as a country. We need to wake up as individuals. We need to wake up as a system, as a government. I've heard it. I've heard like every perspective. News is what I have to sift through every week, and usually I've got this like shade over my eyes to the stuff that's negative. And you know what? I wish I didn't do that. That's something I'm going to change about myself. You know, that's something interesting there. Here's a problem with the way I think. Let me fix it. I'm going to do that. And I can't avoid this. You can't avoid it. Nobody can avoid it. It's here. It's been here, and it's not going anywhere. It's called racism. And if you feel like you're being attacked right now, I'm talking to you. If you feel like this is some kind of attack on your person and the way you think, then yeah, it is. Open your eyes. We're going to talk about the rest of this in detail. I'm going to get over to the guys here. We're going to talk about the protest. We're going to talk about when the protest turned to riot. We're going to talk about government official responses to protests and riots. And then we're going to try to figure out what we can do right now to start pushing forward and away from this. Stay tuned. We're going to talk protests next. You listen to the Just Us Best podcast.
Won the Olympic gold medal in Rome, Italy. Olympic champion, the Russian standing right here and the Pole right here. I'm defeating America's so-called threats or enemies. And the flag is going dun, 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 dun. And I done whooped the world for America. I took my gold medal, thought I'd invented something. I said, man, I know I'm going to get my people freedom now. I'm the champion of the whole world, the Olympic champion. I know I can eat downtown now. And I went downtown that day, had my big old medal on and went to restaurants. At that time, black things wasn't integrated. The black folks couldn't eat downtown. The lady said, we don't serve Negroes. And I had to leave that restaurant in my hometown where I went to church and served in their Christianity and fought, and daddy fought in all the wars. Just won the gold medal and couldn't eat downtown. I said, something's wrong.
All right, so now we're going to discuss the protests and what has become of the protests, our takes on the protests, and even some of the things that you should be expecting if you're planning on attending a protest. Every major city seems to have already joined up on this, and there are protests that have been starting peacefully. Many of these protests have now led to what's being called riots, violence by both police and protesters. So I'm going to open this up to the floor. I'm going to talk a little bit freely about what's been going on, what to expect, and things like that. Richie?
Yeah, I first wanted to start with a very apropos article in the LA Times that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote. I'm just going to read a couple of things that I thought were very important. So just going to start from the top. What was your first reaction when you saw the video of a white cop kneeling on George Floyd's neck when Floyd croaked, "I can't breathe"? If you're white, you probably muttered a horrified, "Oh my God," while shaking your head at the cruel injustice. If you're black, you probably leapt from your feet, cursed, maybe threw something, certainly wanted to throw something while shouting, "Not again." Then you remember that two white vigilantes accused of murdering Arbery as he jogged through their neighborhood in February, and how if it wasn't for that video emerging a few weeks ago, they would have gotten away with it. How those Minneapolis cops claimed Floyd was resisting arrest, but a store video showed he wasn't. And how the cop on Floyd's neck wasn't an enraged redneck stereotype, but a sworn officer who looked calm and entitled and devoid of pity. The banality of evil incarnate. You start to wonder if it should be all black people who wear body cams, not cops. What do you see when you see angry black protesters amassing outside police stations with raised fists? If you're white, you're thinking, they certainly aren't social distancing. But then you notice the black faces looting Target and you think, well, that just hurts their cause. Then you see the police station on fire and you wag a finger saying, that's putting the cause backward. You're not wrong, but you're not right either. The black community is used to institutional racism inherent in education, the justice system, and jobs. And even though we do all the conventional things to raise public and political awareness, read articulate and insightful pieces in The Atlantic, explain the continued devastation on CNN, support candidates who promise change, the needle hardly budges. Yes, protests often are used as an excuse for some to take advantage, just as when fans celebrating a hometown sports team championship burn cars and destroy storefronts. I don't want to see stores looted or even buildings burn, but African Americans have been living in a burning building for many years, choking on the smoke as flames burn closer and closer. Racism in America is like dust in the air. It seems invisible, even if you're choking on it, until you let the sun in. Then you see it's everywhere. As long as we keep shining that light, we have a chance of cleaning it where it lands, but we have to stay vigilant because it's still in the air. So maybe black community's main concern right now isn't whether protesters are standing 3 or 6 feet apart, or whether the desperate souls steal some t-shirts or even set a police station on fire, but whether their sons, husbands, brothers, and fathers will be murdered by cops or wannabe cops just going for a walk, a jog, or a drive. Or whether being black means sheltering at home for the rest of their lives because racism, a virus infecting the country, is more deadly than COVID-19. The only thing I have to say and I wanted people to hear that just so they could understand a perspective that I find very articulate, is that a lot of the times with these protests, it doesn't matter. And I've mentioned this briefly before. It doesn't matter how people protest because it doesn't affect anything. And inherently, the nature of a protest is it has to shake the system to its core for things to change. These gentlemen kneeled on the field, not just Colin Kaepernick. There were so many gentlemen after who did the fact, and they did it. And what was the agenda? No. Don't protest like that. It's against the country. LeBron James spoke about it in a post interview. And no. Talk about basketball. It happens everywhere. Happens at award shows. Right after, there was a situation with Eric Garner, and they wore shirts that said, "I can't breathe." A lot of the NBA teams, Los Angeles in particular. And once again, protests, not like that. It does not matter in the manner of a peaceful protest what happens, because at the end of the day, that's not how America wants it. There's no acceptable way to protest in America if you're black, and that will never change. Justo is going to go over some of the cities and things like that, and I'm not going to go into that, people. I'm sorry, I don't have data. This is all emotion. But to me, one of the things I get most disgusted with when we talk about Black Lives Matter or protests in general is that people always attribute these heinous actions as part of the movement. And let me give you an example of where that's absolutely categorically not accurate. In Oakland on Friday, we protested very recently. And we have been told to stay in, etc. We don't need to get into the semantics of that, but we protested. And what was caught on video is exactly what does happen at these protests. It was a group of white men wearing black outfits. They broke windows at the bank. They had hammers and walkie-talkies. They started fires. They were organized, and they used this as an opportunity to blame this on the movement. This group broke into Chase Bank, Walgreens, set them on fire. Set a bank on fire just to make the movement look bad. And for those of you out there who do view these things like that, and that's why Black Lives Matter is such a problem for you, that's what I want you to listen to. That's what you need to understand, is that that's not what's happening for the people protesting. These are independent people bringing guns, shooting people. Happened years ago. We're coming out to these banks, destroying our cities, and they do it to trick you. So you think about it, that this is negative, and it's not negative. And if these things burn, they're burning not because of this movement. They're burning because of the heinous and sinister nature of the people who want to oppress the people in this country. And it needs to stop right now.
You're absolutely right, Richie, and thank you for that. As far as the cities protesting, obviously the biggest news as far as protesting this week, a lot had to do with what was going on in Minneapolis itself, especially now that you've brought that point to light. You know, who knows where all of the damage is coming from. Once the violence starts, you kind of have to be there to respond and react to it. So if you're not a part of any of these protests, careful. Just be careful, because you have no idea what's going on there. I've got Minneapolis, I've got New York City, Chicago, Louisville. I mean, it's everywhere. Los Angeles, California. Fires and riots have broken out at most of these cities that I'm mentioning, and it kind of seems like a trend that the protests start peaceful, and then before the night is over, somehow they become violent. So we definitely need to be analyzing that within ourselves, and with, in my opinion, it's something that if you're going to attend a protest, you need to be prepared for. In the city I live in, there are the same events happening. Peaceful protest was planned in the downtown area, and while it remained peaceful for most of the day, it did break out into violence, into tear gas, into mace, into rubber bullets, into wooden bullets being fired at protesters. this, in addition to the numbers that are already starting to build of people that have been shot with actual ammunition, is cruel. It's unnecessary. The response with violence, I don't know who gets to say whether or not that's necessary, but I know that I in my personal opinion, for those that are getting involved with any of the looting that's going on, my response is for you to analyze the fact that when you break into a locally owned store or major corporation or a corner gas station, somebody's livelihood relies on that building and the functionality of that building, and they may not be the person that you are trying to get through to with this movement. If, and like I said, like Richie said, there is a big separation between the majority of this violence and the movement itself, a huge separation. And for those of you that are going with the intentions and the plans to protest peacefully, it does not seem to matter if you've been told you can sit or stand here. It does not seem to matter what you're doing, saying, whether or not you're doing or saying anything. It does not seem to matter. When it is time for the police to clear the streets, they will be using force. They have been using force. As close as at least 10 blocks down the street from me, they've been using force. For those of you that choose to believe this is some kind of crazy hoax, good luck. I want you to be careful. I want you to be mindful. I want you to be safe. I want you to understand why you're there. I want you to learn from being there. I want you to be a part of history. But I don't want you to be as a statistic, a number. Because more people dying, in my opinion, is the opposite direction.
Fellas, they used to hose us down, unleash dogs on us in the street, fighting the same fight then, now. So, but a couple of weeks ago, folks, when you saw people out there protesting for the effing government to reopen so they could go to the beauty salon within a week, that they were labeled good protesters from number 45. And I'm not even going to call him a president because that's not what that man is. So when you see protesters today and you see the kind of result that brutality has, when you see this brutality and what it's equated to, all this is a reaction to that. All this is a reaction to that. So it's really, I'm not condoning violence, but it's the resistance now that we're all facing, fellas. Right?
Yes, Marvin, I 100% agree with you. It's the resistance that we're facing. And I just want to add that, there's a narrative that's being written. And that narrative is to detract you from the real situation that's going on. So you have to be mindful and open your eyes. And Richie alluded to this. You've got stories out there that are going on where, and Justo alluded to this as well, where there was a Minnesota cop, or I should say Minneapolis cop, Jacob, that was a part of the protests. And he dressed in all black, and he smashed out the windows to the AutoZone. That AutoZone then caught fire. Well, that narrative is trying to show you the violence that's happening during this protest, during this riot, during the looting. You're seeing photos of black people, Mexican people, looting. You're not seeing many pictures of anybody else looting, but they are. You're not seeing many pictures of other people doing certain things, but they are. So you have to be mindful and open your eyes and realize that there's a narrative that's being written that's trying to undermine the real root cause of what's going on here. Don't be blinded. Don't be blinded for 1 second. That's what they want you to eat. That's what they want you to consume. That's what they want you to digest, to move on and move past this. Don't be blinded. Wake up. Smell the coffee and understand what's really going on here. There's people protesting for the right to live in a just society. There's people doing it in the manner of it's being peaceful. They're being told where to go and where to sit and what to do, and they're following suit to that. Then to be tear gassed, then to have mace sprayed on them, then to have bullets, rubber bullets, wooden bullets shot at them. How is that justice and how is that fair? How can 40 white men go to the Michigan State Capitol with rifles and stand in the Capitol building with rifles, and there is not any gas or wooden bullets or anything fired at them? That was peaceful, folks. That was peaceful, to bring an armed gun into a Capitol building. But for you to stand there unarmed, or even with a rock in hand, you get mazed. You get rubber bullets. You get wooden bullets. And then you have the audacity to sit there and say, well, they're in the wrong. It shouldn't be that way. Sounds like a crooked, messed up mindset that needs to be altered and changed by the narrative that's being fed and you're consuming it.
Yeah, Tony, I 1,000% agree. And to just briefly go over what you just said, the difference between those scenarios is it's unconstitutional in this country to be black. That's the reality of this. It doesn't matter what you guys do. Marvin mentioned it briefly with the dogs and the hoses, and look what's happening now. It doesn't matter. Anything could be construed as peaceful, and they'll find a problem with it because it has nothing to do with the issue. It has everything to do with the color and the tone of the skin. And that's not going to change unless we do something about it now. One of the things I talked to the guys about, and this is a side note, this is a tangent, but what I discussed was I'm flabbergasted, I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm all sorts of things. I'm trying to just conduct myself in a manner that doesn't reflect that while I'm talking to you. But every couple years, I don't understand why it even takes that long, but every couple years, there's an inevitable injustice, and a black man is murdered senselessly. And that happens every day, folks, not just once a month like you see on the news, not once every couple years like I'm referring to. Happens every day. But it takes every couple years, because what happens is after about a week, maybe 2 weeks, maybe a month, society views like, oh, okay, I don't have to pretend to care anymore. Now I can start posting stories on my Instagram and my Facebook and my Pinterest about like this margarita drink that looks really tasty. So I don't need to feel like I need to advocate anymore because nobody's talking about it. The news has died down. The Black Lives Matter movement, there was an issue. There was a protest where one guy said something, or there was a fire set to a bank. I don't know how that happened, but it was during the protest. So this protest is done. I don't need to support it. It's fine. And that's what happens. And it happens every day, and it's senseless. And quite frankly, what I'm hopeful for, what I'm begging people here to really consider is that hopefully this is the last one. Hopefully this is the last time this has to happen on this level. And that if these protests continue, because they're happening everywhere, as Justin mentioned. They're Oakland, Los Angeles, it's everywhere. It's not just one concentrated area. It's not Minneapolis. It's not Ohio. It's not Maine. It's not Florida. It's not Georgia. It's the United States. And they can keep throwing tear gas. They can antagonize us. They can tell us it's wrong. They can try to stop it. But if we continue to protest, they have to listen at some point. And that's my hope.
And that's going to lead me into what I want to talk about too. If you've been listening to this show, you hear us say things like we are referring to those that feel guilty. We're referring to those that we identify in our previous words. And if we call you by name, or if we've reached out to you and you need a public platform to respond, please contact us at justthosebestlive@gmail.com. So in light of what Richie had said and how difficult, how difficult this protest process has become because of all of the things, all of the factors that are happening, there are some great instances where this protest is working. I'm talking about Flint, Michigan. The protest, as many of them have, starts out completely peaceful as either a march or a stance, lines, and the officers involved with that protest, they asked, "What can we do?" To which the protesters responded, "Join us." And what did? They put their batons down. They didn't get out their tear gas. They didn't get out their rubber bullets. They protested with them. They agree that an injustice was done and something needs to be done to stop this from continuing to happen. Okay, that's just one of the positive stories that I've heard so far. Another positive story is all the communities that are coming together. The Amish community, they tend to stay to themselves, to their own community. They don't come into the public. They're protesting. They recognize the social injustice and they're protesting because they care. And, we at Just Those Best, we're reaching out to you. If you feel moved, if you want to do something, please do. But just be wise, be careful, be aware, be smart, pay attention to everything that's going on, and do your research. It's important to know what's happening in these cities. It's important to know which direction that these protests can go. You need to know the risk you're taking by going, and you also need to know that it's working. And it will work. Eventually, the protests can't go on forever. And they can't just go in and attack unarmed people forever. Otherwise, this no longer becomes a democracy. And then we're fighting a different, and I will not pull punches on this, war. If you continue to shoot unarmed civilians, there will be a war. Not caused by me. I'm not saying I'm leading it. But maybe some of these people need to get into their history books. Because if you get into the history books, you will learn that history repeats itself. And by being peaceful, by standing for what you believe in, you are doing everything that you can on your end. Then it is up to the people that have the problem that needs fixed in theirs. Fellas, do you have any other thoughts or comments on protesting or heading out to the protest?
Yeah, Justo, I absolutely plan on going to the protests. They started in Oakland on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. I was not able to attend. I've been grieving, dealing with family loss, but I intend to do it. So after work on Monday, so Monday night I will be in Oakland. There has been a lot of looting. There's been a lot of issues with that. But I think it's important to stand with the cause.
All right, so coming up, we have some real life stories about what is happening in this country and how it makes people feel that are experiencing this racism and this hate in this country, some real stories, so that you might be able to get some insight as to what they're going through. You'll never understand, but it's important to know their side of the story so that you can make intelligent decisions going forward. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Justo's Best podcast.
I don't advocate any kind of hate.
But there's a lot of talk that sounds very much like it.
No, I think that the guilt complex of the American white man is so profound until when you begin to analyze the real condition of the black man in America, instead of the American white man eliminating the causes that create that condition, he tries to cover it up by accusing his accusers of teaching hate. But actually, they're just exposing him for being responsible for what exists. I don't in any way encourage black people to go out and initiate acts of aggression indiscriminately against whites. But I do believe that the black man in the United States and any human being, anywhere, is well within his right to do whatever is necessary, by any means necessary, to protect his life and property, especially in a country where the federal government itself has proven that it is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of those human beings.
All right, so, another topic that I think is very important that we put on here is discussing the presence of racism. We've already kind of discussed how there's, counterpoints being made and saying that, dancing around the subject, but truthfully, that is the reason for everything that you're seeing, all the anger and all of the built up frustration is coming from this continued racism. So to make it real and to just try to shed some light, we're going to talk from personal perspectives and things that have been seen or experienced amongst cast members here on Justo's Best. I'm going to turn it over to Tony.
Well, I was the black kid that went to an all-white school, and, I always felt like there was like 5 of us that were black, and I always felt like a zebra. Like I didn't know if I was white with black stripes or black with white stripes, and just trying to fit in. And sometimes things were said just to keep it low key, chicken, cornbread, watermelon. And you can ask yourself, well, that's pretty low key, but is it low key when you're 8, when you're 9 years old, and you're trying to justify when that stuff happens to you? So then as I got older, I said, well, so much for trying to fit into one side and the other side, because believe it or not, folks, racism is all around. I get discriminated against because the color of my skin from both sides. Because I went to an all-white school, I'm known as an Uncle Tom. I'm known as a sellout. I'm known as, the guy that's wants to walk and talk and be like the white man. And from the other side, it doesn't matter if I walk and talk. It doesn't. Because my skin is still brown. I'm still black. I can't golf at Augusta. I'm not Tiger Woods. So, it's hurting and discomfort, but I got to a point where I said, I'm just going to be me. And you'll either like me or don't like me, but I'm going to be me regardless. I am very comfortable in any situation. I don't regret going to an all-white school because I can be around a whole bunch of white people and not feel that way that I hear other African Americans talk about being around whites. I'll tell a short story and then I'll move on. I took Richie to an outing that was at my wife's hometown. And I told him, I said, I want you to be aware that it's going to be crazy. It's going to be a little uncomfortable. And he looked at me and said, what do you mean? You know, of course it's going to be crazy and uncomfortable. There's a whole bunch of white people there, like Richie would say. And I said, no, man, I'm telling you, this is going to be different on a totally different level, because they are a set of people who are in a small town that they don't know what it's like to be around a lot of other cultured people. I'll put it like that. So we were at a festival and a guy came up to me, and this is just one of many stories, but this story is just fitting. And he said to me, he said, hey, how you doing? Can you do a monkey dance for me? I don't know this guy. Never seen him before in my life. I'm standing next to my wife. I'm standing next to Richie. And I said, excuse me? He said, yeah, you know, a monkey dance, like how you all be dancing. I didn't know what to say. I was flabbergasted. I was disgusted. I was hurt. But I was prepared, because it doesn't matter if it's going to happen. It's when it's going to happen. And that's the reality, folks. That's the reality that I'm trying to get you to understand, is that I live day to day thinking of scenarios and how I would handle them, because it's not a matter of if it happens, it's when it's going to happen. And will I be prepared for it? Will I be able to help cultivate my son and have him be prepared for it? Or my daughter, or anyone else that's in my life that means anything, that's of some different kind of background. It's sad, it hurts, but it's the reality. And like I said, I've got multiple stories, but there's no point to talk about multiple stories. Let's just talk about one and focus on it, so that way everyone understands the reality of it. It's sickening and it hurts. And that's all I have to say.
Marvin, did you want to share with us?
I did. Thank you, Tony. I just wanted to let you all know I have many stories as well. I have many instances, many occasions where I've been called nigger. And one of the things that sticks out the most was I was in high school. I was just ended summer school that summer. It didn't go well that year. But I was seeing someone that I met in summer school. And they attended another high school, not the same one. And we started to hit it off. And she told me before things started to get a little serious that she had an ex-boyfriend that wasn't exactly stable at the time. He was badgering her. It was a breakup that it had been a nasty breakup, is what she forewarned me, and that he kept calling her and that he kept saying all these things, and he knew that she was seeing me. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it too much. And one day I was playing golf and I got a call, and I didn't answer the call. It was a number I didn't recognize. So I just continued to play. So after I was finished playing, I checked my phone and I had 2 voicemails. And in those voicemails were, I know you're seeing her, you effing N-word, leave her alone. You effing N-word, leave her alone. And I'm 29, folks. I was 14 at the time. And I'll never forget it. And there was no way I could have approached the relationship moving forward. And from the rest of the time of being in high school to graduating high school, I encountered that on many occasions living in Dayton, Ohio. And I can relate to what Tony was saying earlier about attending an all-white high school. My high school was predominantly white. And when I got to high school, it was, they preached diversity. That's what they wanted. They wanted to let you know that their message was diversity. But to me, it felt like division. And at the lunch table, you had Black kids that sat on one side, and on the right side, you had white kids that sat on that side. And it was just division. And one more story before I get to anything else that really just breaks my heart every time I think about it, fellas. The park that is up the street from my house, from where my hometown is, I was on the phone with the guidance counselor from New York Film Academy, which is a school that I attended in 2014, the school that I was going to attend. I was moving from Dayton to New York. I was on the phone. A cop car comes in. He stops and he says, "How long have you been sitting there?" He yells it at me. I'm on the phone. And I said, I'm trepidatious. I say, I'm on the phone with my counselor. And I kind of hand the phone like this as proof to tell him that this is who I'm talking to. And he says, "Yeah, that's what I thought. Make it quick." And he just speeds out. This is just a park up the street from my house. Point I'm making, guys, is that you have to, for myself, I have to live with this every day as a Black man. Not knowing whether or not there's a target on my back when I leave my house. Having to not be naive to the fact that I moved from what I thought was getting away from racism to a place in New York City where that shit is still going on, where they ran over protesters this past weekend. NYPD ran over protesters, and de Blasio almost justified it. So I've got many things that's happened in my life, but subconsciously, guys, folks, I blocked some of those images out. Whether I was in the workplace and got called a nigger, whether I was in high school and college and got called that, it didn't matter. The same thing with Tony and I. The kind of racism that we've had to face from our own people, not having to face the bullshit of explaining yourself, of being Black enough. When you see someone's knee on the back of their neck, I want y'all to ask yourselves, does it matter now? Can we unify? Can we stop the self-hate? Can we stop destroying each other and attempt to try to achieve something else that we're still fighting for? We're fighting the same fight, running the same race. Tony and I, Justin and I, Richie, all of us on this show, all of us are fighting the same race. It's just a matter of what you're going to stand up and fight for. And I've got many stories, but it's unfortunate that the book is still being written. But shit like this.
So for the audience, I thought this was an important topic to talk about, and it's one I really think is relevant. To hear Tony and Marvin's stories is significant, but I'd also like to convey my stories as hopefully an optical lens that maybe if you haven't been engaged, you can kind of see through my lens and understand where I'm coming from, and hopefully what I've learned, you'll be able to learn as well. When I was young, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio as well, predominantly white school, and I felt that I understood what racism was because I was treated differently by the color of my skin. What Marvin mentioned was directly my experience in life. I went to school, literally the only Asian kid. There were some black kids. I didn't get to sit with the white kids. I didn't get to sit with the black kids. The only people I was fortunate enough to sit with were some of the girls in class. And honestly, that's a big reason why my circle of friends is predominantly women. It was the only people who I felt like gave me a chance, let me feel engaged. And as I got older, things didn't really seem to change. I was 16 years old. I was at my best friend's house, and a woman in a SUV ran into my car, completely totaled it. Speed limit is on the street is 25 miles an hour. It was parked. She hit it so hard, rolled down the street, 6 houses, went into someone's house. It was in park. I hear a car alarm going off. I don't really think about it. 10 minutes goes past. I go outside and I recognize it's my car. I was devastated, as a 16-year-old. Like, I'd worked so hard to have this car. Spent like all my money. We were very poor, so I had to do it on my own. And then the police are there, and the woman had been talking to me, and she said, hey, I did this. I'm sorry. And then the police tried to pin it on me. Honestly, they completely kept ignoring what she was saying, tried to pull me aside. I called my father, and he came down, and it took about 3 hours. It was one of the most absurd things I've ever felt in my life, to be honest. And I really felt like in that moment, I knew what racism was, honestly. And then progressively throughout my life, I would run into people, and it's the same story from when I was 8 to when I was in my 20s, and honestly meeting a lot of some of my friends who I still call friends to this day is the first thing, anytime it was a joke, and it's just jokes. I'm the Asian guy, I'm Chinese. It was never, there was never a point where they'd associate eating a rib with anything outside of the skin tone of who I was. And that's how I was identified in Ohio. And like Marvin had mentioned, I moved out here because honestly, that was a big part. I always lied to people. I always told them, hey, I just wanted an opportunity. No, I didn't want an opportunity. I was sick of that. So I moved out here, and I thought things would get better, and it didn't get better. But the reason why I tell you all those other stories is not to say that I didn't experience racism or I did understand what racism was, is that I didn't know what being targeted was. All those stories you heard was racism. But what it was is something where I was never in risk of or endangerment of my life. And it's completely different than the stories you hear Tony and Marvin discuss. And in that moment, I was about 31 years old when I truly understood what systemic racism is. And that's what we were discussing today, folks. It's systemic racism. That's what this movement is about. It's not about the color of your skin. It's about people's lives are in danger because of their skin tone. And I think it's super important to understand that. It's not about your experiences. It's not about like, I've had a hard life too. Everyone's had hard lives. And I just told you some stories that for a lot of you, you've never experienced either. And you're probably feeling sad for me. But the reality is those experiences that I felt and that I dealt with and am still dealing with are nothing in comparison to being targeted. I can't understand. I can't fathom what it's like to walk outside and worry about if I'm going to be the next George Floyd. So I implore all of you who are listening that if you think you understand what racism is, if you think you understand what any of this is, that think about the difference between being treated differently and being murdered in cold blood. Drastically different.
First and foremost, I want to thank all three of you for sharing. I know that that's not easy, and I love you guys, and to go through what you've gone through, it just further exemplifies the people that you are, that I know you are, because if and I think some first-time listeners are probably figuring that out if they've been listening to this whole season. These incredible people come from the backgrounds that they do, and that's what makes you guys incredible. And this is if you're white and you're still listening, you're uncomfortable. You feel like you don't belong in this conversation. You feel like the only place you have is to sit back and feel attacked because maybe you haven't done anything. Or maybe you've done something and you feel bad about it. Maybe you've done something and you don't feel bad about it. But you belong. That's how things can start to get fixed, is if you listen and understand. Start to understand. You'll never understand, but you can start to understand. This is what I'm going to do, because it's not fair for me to tell somebody else's story. I've witnessed racism. The closest I can come to this, and it's not even very close, is experiencing sexual prejudice at the hands of an officer. In 2009, I was a freshman acting student, and I had an opportunity to work with the Dayton Police Academy. They casted us in real life situation roles, and we're going to have officers, new officer trainees, respond to these calls. I was given domestic violence with a, I don't want to misquote her height, but she was short. And what we decided to do was all in good fun, or at least to me. We switched roles. She was the aggressor in the domestic violence case. And I was yelling on purpose, but I was yelling in response to her throwing things inside this room, and the officers have to decide what they're to do. I think out of the 6 groups, 5 of them breached the door. I only opened one, and all 6 of them detained me. Instantly, aggressively, as they were allowed to. And I've, fought it, playing along, saying, "Oh, dude, you can't put me in cuffs. She's crazy. She's, And then time went on, and I realized that not only could that be me, but 6 times in a row, that was me. So I cannot imagine that target being on my back 24/7. For me, it's circumstantial. For me, I'd have to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. For someone of color, they could be walking down the street. And it sickens me.
So I just want to reiterate some of the things that were mentioned earlier, and I appreciate everybody's being able to have the strength to share their stories, Justo, Marvin, Richie. But I had time to reflect a little bit while you guys were talking. And, it's so hard to try to put into words so that way the people that we want to understand. It's so hard to articulate that to them.
Struggle.
And that's the main struggle for me. I mean, that's what it comes down to. I can tell you any kind of story, and the story that I picked was PG. It was just a PG story.
Yeah, I think I left shit out, bro.
Yeah,
I left that story about me being detained, and it was just too hard for me to bring that up and articulate it, like you said.
Yeah. This is how I'll sum it up. I'll sum it up like this. Imagine being told that you couldn't date a girl because of the color of your skin at a young age. You go to the house, she opens the door, you both like each other, and the dad says that she can't go with you. He doesn't really say why, but you find out why later. And how do you consume that? How do you take that? How do you digest that? Imagine not being able to hang out at your friend's house and your friend tells you, well, there's other reasons why you can't come over. And you don't know what those other reasons are. But your friend then tells you what those reasons are because he doesn't want to seem like it's, just blank. Thank you for having the courage to tell me why I couldn't come over. But that's messed up. It's completely messed up. Imagine trying to be scared every time you get into a car and you take a drive, or being told that you must be a drug dealer because you drive a Mercedes. How can you afford that Mercedes, man? You dealing drugs? Why do I have to be associated with drugs just because I drive a Mercedes? I couldn't have worked hard for that money and then bought the Mercedes. Imagine going shopping and walking down an aisle and you walk past a woman's cart and her purse is left in the cart. And then she goes and she grabs the purse and stares you down like you were going to take the purse. Imagine what that would feel like. Imagine playing a sport and not being that good playing a sport. But you should be good playing that sport. Don't you jump real high? Don't you run real fast? Isn't that what y'all do? Imagine what that feels like. Imagine not being able to dance and you have to teach yourself how to dance by watching Michael Jackson videos because in school, that's what it was known as. You were supposed to be able to dance. Don't you people dance? So I had to teach myself how to dance. Imagine not playing a sport and what that looks like. Not playing a sport and people saying, well, shouldn't you be on the basketball team? Why? I like reading books. I like playing chess. I like bowling. Bowling? Imagine what that feels like. This is just a little list that I came up with just listening to these stories. Imagine being put in the back of a cop car for no reason except for that your lights were turned off and you didn't turn them on when you got into your car at 17. And you were in the back of a cop car as they checked whatever they had to check. What would that feel like to be put in the back of the car? Imagine what that feels like. Can you? It's eye-opening for some, but it's blinded to others. This is real. It's deep. And a lot of people, I hope, at the end of this show, can question what this really is all about. Because I really don't think they're going to understand. Some of them might, some of them might not. Richie hit the nail on the head. He hit it on the head when he was talking. And I commend you, Richie, and I appreciate your point of view. Richie was talking about fear. And he was talking about how sometimes people in an injustice act don't get justified actions done, and it's because of fear and being able to move past it. Above all, don't fear difficult moments. The best comes from them. Everything you want is on the other side of fear. This discomfort that you feel is exactly what you should feel in order for there to be change, in order for there to be a difference. That's all I have. I can't get everything else up.
When we come back, we're going to discuss what happens now. What do we do now? You see how real it is. You see how deep it cuts. And I hope you see things from a different point of view. Now we're going to talk about what happens now. You're listening to the Justo's Best podcast.
Well, I think that at once I'm delighted that he had the dream. I'm delighted that if he awakened right now, he could also say, some of my dream has come to pass, and see that there are African-American family in the White House, a man and a man and a woman and their children and a grandmother, a black grandmother in the White House. My goodness. At the same time, I think he would be disappointed to hear we have not come any farther. And so my hope is that the dream, we can awaken from the dream and find that some of the elements of the dream have come to pass.
You don't believe that there is true equality yet?
Oh, I know there isn't, and you know there isn't, and everybody who hears you No, there isn't. And yet this is what we have to have. The only thing is, Mr. Cooper, people have to develop courage. It is most important of all the virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can be anything erratically and in front of the microphone, in front of the camera. But to be that thing in your heart, you have to have courage. And so I'm afraid that we are lacking in courage. We think we are afraid. And fear, I'm sorry to say, motivates most of the cruelties in our world. Mr. Cooper, if you think that I can have freedom, but you can't because you're short, or you're tall, or you're gay, or fat, or thin, or pretty, or plain, but I can have it because not by anything I've earned. I just was born white, or I was born pretty. And then you're just stupid. The truth is, no one of us can be free until everybody is free. And every one of us needs to say to our children, children, this is your world. Come out, stand out, earn it.
So we've expressed our opinions on the murder of George Floyd. We've talked about what that means and how long this systemic racism has continued to plague this country. We've talked about the protests. We've talked about the riots. These guys have shared in-depth stories from their real lives of how racism is still a prevalent issue in this country. And I hope you're still listening, and I hope you're internalizing, and I hope this gives you some insight. Now we must ask, what do we do? What do we do now?
I want to thank you all, Justin, Tony, Richie, you all that took a chance to listen to this show today. Although everything that was said you may not be comfortable with, but to be quite frank with you, we don't care. Because we need to understand that this is a repetitive thing. This is not something that happens every other 5 years, every other 10 years. This is happening every year. And what we can do is continue to, educate people on cultural sensitivity. You know, those that are silent during times like this, we need you to get up. We need you to reach out. You have Black friends. We need you to reach out to your friends. Check on them. See how they're doing. Check on your friends. Because we're getting tired of this. We're really getting tired of this. And the best thing we can do right now is exercise our voices. I urge you all out there to exercise your voice. Use your platforms. We're using this podcast, the three of us, and it wasn't easy for us to share these stories with you today. Even the stories we held back from. I was held, I was cuffed, I was detained. I've been there. I've been in that position and feeling fear. I was blessed enough to be out of that situation. So asking you all to just stop for a moment, because that could be your son, your nephew, your daughter. And the names don't end, from George Floyd to Breonna Taylor to Ahmaud Arbery to Trayvon Martin, Eric Garner. The list goes on and on and on. How are we going to make it stop? Our voices. The power of the pen and the vote. I urge you all to just wake up. That's what we got to do. Wake the up.
I would like to say virtually the same thing as Marvin just said. There's not much else to say. Silence is violence, guys. By not speaking out, by not participating, you are 100% the problem. You can blame it on these police. You can blame it on the narrative of the media. But at the end of the day, your lack of support, your lack of faith, your lack of willingness to put yourself out there, your privilege that you don't use, that we would beg, borrow, and steal to have, you need to do something. It's very simple. Participate, be active. Marvin already said it. Vote, check on each other, find ways to make this happen. We're not claiming the police are perfect, but the unions and the allowance to allow this to continue. How many people have to die before something changes? How many times does this have to come up? How often are you going to scroll and keep scrolling past this and just avoiding it because it doesn't affect you? It does affect you. It does affect you. And it's disgusting to feel like it's not. I don't know what else to say other than we understand at the end of the day, a lot of people are always going to view us differently, particularly black men. You're going to call us names. We're not asking you to change that. That's a whole nother story. But you sure as hell can change making sure that people aren't being hunted. You sure as hell can say something, urge people, talk to your senators, talk to your governor, talk to your mayor. I don't care what you do, your representative, your city representatives. Speak out, reach out to your government and do something. Because there's a difference, a drastic difference between being called a name and being hunted in the streets for being black.
Yeah, thanks, Marvin, Richie, Justo, for sharing your stories and your viewpoints. And, you know, it's refreshing to sit and have a conversation with folks about something that's this important and to be able to see how others are affected. And that's why we wanted to put this show together. Not because it was easy, because it wasn't easy. There was times that we had to stop recording just because people were getting emotional. There was times that we had to stop recording because we didn't know the right tone or the words to put in place. That's what made this experience refreshing and nice, and that we were able to put together for you so that way you could listen to it. Now it's all up to you as the listener, as the person that is affected, whether you're black, whether you're white, no matter what you are. What will you do different? How will you be different? What would you say to be different? Will you vote like they said? Will you call your senator like they said? All these things comes down to the individual and what change they want to see. Isn't that what the quote is? Be the change you want to see. We just want to be accepted in a world that doesn't gun us down, in a world that doesn't hunt you, set dogs on you, mace you, shoot you with bow and arrows, with bullets, whatever it is. That's what we're asking for. That's what this fight is all about. Richie hit the nail on the head. It's not about a word. I can wake up the next day with you saying a word. I can't wake up the next day if you pull a trigger.
I want to thank you guys again for sharing throughout. There's no testimony like a true story, and you guys have some really, truly eye-opening stories, and I hope that they were received. But, you know, Justo's best. When we clicked this off today, we've said our piece. As Tony alluded to, we have done what we can to bring up the subject so that you can listen and so that you can digest it. The rest is up to you. Next week, we're going to go back to our show. We're going to focus on positivity. We'll be here to lift you up. But we can't fix not being awake to this. We can't do that for you. You got to wake up to this. Like Marvin said, you got to do this yourself. This is on you. Me? Right now, I'm an angry American. I live in a country that does not support the belief system that I feel like should be in place. And I feel like the response from that country to like-minded individuals standing peacefully to do so is violence and a violent call to action via childish social media remarks, and I'm tired. And whether you think, no matter what you think, this only ends when people start analyzing their lives and the way that they are conducting themselves. Every week, I end the show with a quote. It's been the same quote since 2011. So I want to break that down. Every week I ask you to live. This week I ask you to stop living in fear, stop living in ignorance, and start living with a grounded moral compass. I'd be less angry with you if you knew you were racist. Every week I ask you to love. This week I ask you to love everyone. This week I ask you to keep love as a halo behind you if you're walking into a protest or if you're walking down the street. This week I ask you to love everyone you see, even though I know you won't because there's so much hate out here, but I ask you to anyway. And I always quote or cap all three of those off with "like it's your last." And there's never been a more real time for that statement, because you have no idea when this world's going to end or how it's going to end for you. But if you're asking me, it looks like every day you run out of time. Actually, I know for a fact every day you run out of time. And I hope you truly picked something up from this, whether it be from the stories, whether it be from the facts that you may have not heard yet, whether it be from the different perspectives that you heard. And if not, then there's no helping you. We've said what we can say, and I hope some of that stuck. So I'm going to say it this time, and I hope it means to you what it means to me today and how much of a different statement this is. For Justo's best, live, laugh, love like it's your last.